Hello everybody, I'm Alex at Peak the Painter on Instagram, and Bling reached out to me earlier on in the week and they asked if I would put together a short tutorial video on how to paint some of their nameplates. So as you can see, what we've got before us is one of their No Fear nameplates. This one in particular is designed for a Warlord Titan for Adeptus Titanicus. And I'm just going to take you through a few steps as to how I got the effect, which you may or may not have seen on the Bling website. We're going to make this pretty straightforward, pretty simple. I'm going to take it through in 2 steps so that there's going to be effectively a battlefield ready look for this, and then I will basically take it a few steps further to kind of like what I would count as my display standard. When it's done, you'll have something which you can put on front of your model or on front of your Titan, and hopefully you can be proud of. We've started with just undercoating this black. You can go for like an Abaddon black spray, or you could just paint it any black, matte black from Army Paint is also pretty good. This is what we're using for the base, and what we're going to do is we're going to actually cover this from the start with another black. For this, I'm going to be using this is Corvus Black by Citadel Paints. It's kind of like a really dark grey, really. This is generally the sort of colour which I use for most of my blacks. I don't like anything too absolute white or too absolute black, so this is kind of a really good sort of slightly off black colour. So I'm going to use an airbrush to apply this just because it's quick, but obviously you can apply it using a paintbrush. So very quickly, we're just going to apply Corvus Black pretty much over the top of everything, but we're going to concentrate on the sort of recessed areas of the nameplate. And what we're going to do now is we're actually going to start applying some gold. So for these golds, I'm going to start with a base coat of Victorian brass, and this is by Scale 75 in their Metal and Alchemy range. And just with a little bit of water, I'm going to essentially apply this all over the nameplate, apart from in that recessed area behind. And as any Instagram or YouTube tutorial video will tell you, always make sure that you're not flooding your brush with paint. Make sure you always wipe off a little bit. As you can see here on the wings, I'm just using almost like the side of the brush. That's just quite a nice, neat way of getting at all of the areas of detail without flooding over into the cracks. Something you may notice is that I've not stuck this to my model yet. The reason for this is obviously it makes it a lot easier for handling the nameplate if it's not already stuck to your base. You could just stick it to the base that you're going to be applying it to and paint it from that. That works. Usually the base is the last thing that I actually do when I'm painting a model, so I've usually stuck the model to it by this point. So this is why I do pretty much all of my nameplates separately, just stuck onto a cork or to a paintbrush, sorry, a paint pot, just with a bit of blue tack. Just again with the side of the brush. The underneath you don't have to be too neat about. Obviously this is not an area that you're going to be seeing of the actual model, but it's always good to just add a little bit of colour there rather than just adding, keeping it completely black. So on the edges here you can see that there's the sort of back of the nameplate, there is a little bit of a recessed, or rather a little bit of detail, so I don't paint the whole thing, I just go to the end of the detail. And then last but not least, we're going to go in on the lettering. So just have to be steady, a bit neat, but obviously you don't have to worry too much because the lettering is all raised. Sometimes even going down the side Again, using the side of the brush is usually the way forward here. Okay, so there's the first coat. One coat's not enough, so very quickly I'm just going to slap on the second coat and get us to the end of this stage. And there you have the end of the first stage. So if you're looking for something that's just battlefield ready, you just do that, put it on your model. Looks perfectly good enough, looks really good, some really nice contrast. That wouldn't look out of place on any self-respecting Titan. But if you want to take it to the next step, or to the next level, then there's a few more steps that we can do. So at the moment we've just effectively base coated this. We've got two colours, we've got the Corvus and we've got the Victorian brass. What we're going to do now is going to introduce a little bit more kind of contrast and make this sort of look a bit more metallic, a bit more shiny. Introduce a few kind of true metallic metal techniques. What we're going to do for that is we're going to start off with some contrast paint. So we're going to use the Guilliman Flesh by Citadel Colour. Now what we're going to be doing is we're going to have to approach this by looking at the nameplate in almost like thirds. So what we're going to be doing is building up layers of darker colour towards every kind of sharp edge, like a corner, and then effectively using multiple layers of the Guilliman Flesh, we're going to be creating almost like a blend, a transition from the Victorian brass down to a much darker Guilliman Flesh. So what we'll do is we'll start with some of the Guilliman Flesh on the brush, not too much, you don't want to overly flood it, and we'll start with this bottom row here. So if you kind of treat this in thirds, so you have from the corner here to about there, which would be like a third in, then another third across, and then a third back to the other corner. And we're going to use the Guilliman Flesh to effectively, drawing back to the darkest corner, start building up some contrast. So with some of that on the brush, I'm going to start from a third in and just apply that over the top of the Victorian brass. And then again from the other side, roughly kind of get it in a similar sort of position as the other side, so it doesn't look too off centre, and draw that back to the corner. And we're going to repeat this over the entire model. The difference being on the top here, we've obviously got it's a little bit different just in the way of relief and where the shadows would naturally fall. So we're going to kind of treat each of these sections here as a separate element. So we're going to go a third into here and a third off from here and a third in from here and a third off from here, and leaving this area here where the recessed areas around the eagle is going to be a darker colour, which is where the light would kind of fall into shadow. So let's pick our third and start applying the paint. The good thing about the Battle Bling nameplates is if you want to be exact, you can actually count the rivets. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rivets is how far I've gone on here. So on the other side I can do the same. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rivets. And just count that again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and draw that back. So you know that it should look pretty equidistant. And then we're going to do similar from here into the middle. And this time we're going to carry this dark colour all the way through, and then we're going to come out the other side. Again, drawing it back to the areas that you want it to be dark. So with the wings, I like to keep the lighter areas of this towards the end. So again, the rule of thirds, I leave a third from the end and I will draw back up into the kind of corners, the darker area, leaving about a third of it a little bit brighter. I'll do the same on the other side. And then on the tops and on the bottoms, we're going to kind of just find the line where we put our paint and draw that back to the area. So there's little indentations here which is used in Titanicus. They use this to align their nameplates. sorry, the arc templates, and you can kind of use that as your middle point and just draw that to that point. You can bring that down. Again, you finding where you've started the colour and then drawing that back. Around the eagle's heads, I like to just apply a little bit into the cracks, just so there's a bit more contrast. We're going to paint this a little bit of a lighter colour, so just kind of go into some of the little elements, like the eye holes and any lines. And then bottom's not so important, but I'm just a bit of a completionist myself, so I like to know that that bit is done as well. And then lastly, the only part that we need to do is the name. So we're going to apply a different technique this time. We're going to take the dark Glimmin' Flesh and we're going to run it as a line right down the middle. So you can almost like run your brush just down the middle of the lines. Straight down the middle. Don't worry about being too neat, because the following stages you're going to see this sort of tidied up a little bit and just some of that contrast restored. So it doesn't look like much at the moment, but the important part of this is that this is effectively repeated over a number of phases. So I'm just going to paint in just little dots around the rivets just to give them some shade around the rivets, and then we're going to do the same thing again. But this time we're not going to start from exactly the same point. We're going to start from slightly further up. So whereas before we started a third in, this time I'm going to start slightly further back from that and just apply another layer, and this will just mean that that first layer is slightly lighter than the layer underneath it. And you can do this as much or as little as you're willing to do. It's not something which has to be done as many times as I might do it, or some people may do it more to build up even more contrast. So just not all the way from the end, just again taking it a little bit further in. And the same on the wings. We're probably like starting about halfway up now. Just adding a little bit more paint on top. And then again on the top. So obviously remember that this is essentially two halves and you want to be drawing into that indentation. You don't want to be pulling all of the dark paint to the edge all the way over here. You want it to be around here in the middle. And then lastly, the wording is a little bit different. All we're going to do here is keep applying that same stripe over the middle just to bring that colour more, the contrast on that right up and make it darker, as dark as possible, running through the middle. And in the later stages, that should really pop. Okay, I'm going to do one more level on this now, one more level of shading. I'm going to take it even further back. I'll say one more, maybe two more. We'll see how this looks when we finished. Now we're almost like probably less than a quarter in, aren't we? So we're starting to get this transition from the really shiny gold to a darker, more brown colour at the edges. said I was going to do 3, I'm going to do 4. This time right in the corners. Just bring that darkness up even more. Even further in, even less area covered. Okay, I think that looks quite good at this point. I'm probably thinking it actually looks worse at this point than it did before, and it looked perfectly fine when you were just having the Victorian brass. This is kind of like a all or nothing step. I think when you've done this, you need to take it through to the end. So what we're going to do now is we're going to, I keep using the word contrast, even more contrast. This time we're going to take some of the higher levels up. And for that we're going to use some Dwarven Gold, again by scale 75. We're going to use this as effectively like the first highlight colour. So again, a bit of water on your paint, a bit of water in your paint. Just apply a little bit. This is quite a translucent paint, scale 75 Dwarven Gold. So in the kind of middle areas here, we're just going to very carefully apply a bit between those rivets. We're not going to completely cover over all of the Victorian brass underneath it, but we're going to do most of it. Okay, and then on the wings we're going to do all of the edges on the wings. As you can see, that's restored quite a lot of the shine, which has kind of been a little bit muddied up by the Guilliman flesh. Make those eagle heads pop a little bit more with a bit of that over the top. Again on the front, just very carefully, not to kind of like take away too much of the shading and the detail. We're just going to add a little bit of colour back in there. And then using sideways brush motions, we're going to just sort of feather that in, just so it's not quite so blocky. It's not like hard lines on the top. Okay, and then on the lettering for this, now we're going to use that same Dwarven Gold, and we're going to apply some paint to the very tops and the very bottom of the lettering. So it's nice and easy on things like D's and O's, you can just run it straight along the line, but this is where we're kind of trying to pull a bit more of that gold colour back in, away from that browny colour which the Guilliman flesh has left behind. This is a little bit trickier, they've got to take a little bit more time. Just go in and just neaten it up if needs be in places. It's not too obvious. Okay, now you can see started to add much more definition between the highlights and the lowlights and the shadows. So at this point we're nearly done. The only thing left to do to really kind of make this stand out and to get you to the point where you, on the photos on the website, is you just need to add some edge highlighting in and some spot highlighting here and there. And for that we're going to be using Vallejo metal colour gold. This is technically it's an airbrush paint, but you can use it as a paintbrush paint, but it is very, very liquid. You definitely don't, I'm sure some people do, but you don't really need to apply any water to this because the consistency of the paint is very, very thin. For this reason as well, you need to make sure that using a fine detail brush, you're also going to be removing quite a lot from your brush. So fill up a bit of your brush and then you're just using a tissue. You can see how much that just kind of runs off the brush. You don't want much on here at all because you run the risk of it running or it flooding. And what we're going to do is we're going to apply a line highlight to pretty much every single edge on the nameplate. So you can see it almost looks silver. It's actually gold. This is why you need a fine detail brush. Just be really careful using the edge of your brush to apply the paint. You're going to have to keep going back and keep topping up your paint as you're removing most of it before it's being applied to the model. Just pick out those edges. And go on to the wings, again on the edges, but for the wings we're going to do something slightly different. So on the inside of the wings we're only going to paint the top where the light would catch, other than the around the edge. So we're not going to do both sides, just along the top there, each wing, each feather I suppose. And what this line highlight does is effectively ties those shadows and highlights together and kind of makes the eye look as if they're blending across the two separate sections. Okay, so I think that's it for the line highlighting on the main body. Before we go on and do the lettering, I'm just going to go in and just pick out some of these rivets with, again, the side of the brush is usually good. This can get a little bit messy if you're not careful, so just be ready that if you do make a mistake here, you can quickly apply a little bit of water to the area and almost like brush the paint out before it becomes a problem. Back of the nameplate as well, because you have to remember that although this is the side which is being stuck to the model, it is also pointing up, so unless you've got something heavy overhanging your base, this will still be seen. So we're going to do the lettering now. This is the last step of the lettering. It's probably the most fiddly. Again, same technique, we're just going to apply a line highlight all over, but you've just got to be super careful that you're just catching those edges. We're going to go along every line, including the bits in the shadow. I like to do this by rotating the nameplate. So I'll do all of the flat edges on this side first, as you can see, and then I'll rotate it and I'll do all of the flat edges which are on the other side and 90 degrees, and then keep rotating. I'm not really applying very much paint at all, it's just really just catching those edges. And there you have it. That is the finished nameplate in all of its glory. You can very quickly get one of these nameplates up to tabletop standard very, very quickly. But even just putting in just a little bit of extra effort doesn't take that much time. especially if you're doing this on something like a Warlord or Titans for Adeptus Titanicus. You can probably paint an entire mana pool in around about an hour. If you're going down to the 30k, 40k, 32mm style bases, you've obviously got a lot less area to paint, so they would be quicker by that admission. But even then, you could definitely knock some of these out quite quickly. So I hope that's been useful, and I hope that you've enjoyed it. And remember that you can get your nameplates from Bling. They do them in packs of 10, and really good quality. I love these nameplates. I don't actually use anybody else's nameplates. They've got a whole range. This is my personal favourite, but they do have a range of very different nameplates that you can choose from. So until next time, we'll hopefully see you again soon.